to perfection, from spoiled child to selfless partner, the only one who could keep the nation as his soul was kept by her in Laura's return.
I recall a conversation I had with my mother as father was healing from his broken shoulder. We were at the palace in Hath, and it was the calm before that final storm of events, the tipping point that so changed everyone's lives, forever. As lioness to Zarin's lion, I felt like I understood, or could understand, best what it might be like to hold the position my mother held for 30 years. I knew, or at least sensed, that there were deeper implications for the role of Kaylee to the keeper that the average Estolians couldn't comprehend. I thought to ask her to clarify the difference, but her question, instead of an answer, was clarification enough. You once told me that on the day you became lioness, that the Tosika, the claws of lioness, reached out and struck down your enemies. Can you share how that felt, what it entailed? How can one explain to another the actions of divinity working in concert with a mere mortal here upon our waking world? And then I saw. Inasmuch as I could never truly explain to her what it meant to be lioness and interact with divinity, she too could never explain to me what being Kaylee to the keeper and a portal for deity here upon earth was like. We both in our way understood each other, while never crossing that chasm of differences engendered by being the most spiritual woman in our respective realms. Miracle Zakarian. Introduction. The Pride of Hath.
The two Andestolian cart horses snorted in the pre-dawn mist. Antonio climbed up next to Tobias.
"Thanks,"
he said. Tobias urged the two sturdy geldings to a brisk trot. They travelled down the palace road from the stable village for several minutes before Tobias said,
"Honored to serve."
Tobias didn't like to talk. Key, his direct male ancestor, was incapable of speech. Antonio never discerned whether his reticence was an affectation or true substance. The source didn't matter nearly as much as his character, and he had long since proved his character. While the two large Andestolians set a brisk pace, Antonio's thoughts were drawn back to the weeks following Samuel's passing. After the funeral, he was determined to return to Middlemast to find and salvage Samuel's treasure. But he couldn't do it alone. Tobias's condolences, as the carriages started to depart from the Eternity Hills graveyard, were the catalyst. He'd asked if Tobias would second him in retrieving the spilled contents of the chest. His response was typical. First he swung into the saddle of his enormous horse, the cross between an Andestolian and a forest horse, and collected the reins. His near-black eyes sparkled with vigor, even while a look of stoic determination settled on his face. His answer was eloquent.
"When?"
It took nearly 3 weeks of careful, coordinated effort before they brought every last doubloon, each jewel-adorned sword and dagger, each gold bar, everything worthy of the chest full of pirate treasure to the surface. But they accomplished it. He lifted a hand to block the glare of the sun that had breached the horizon. He thought about how Tobias fashioned a new, sturdy chest to store the items and promised to help Antonio hide it away. As the horses pulled off the developed road, Antonio's thoughts turned to the pathway he'd chosen. In the 8 days since he met with his father in his office in the temple, he kept thinking about the treasure he and Tobias had hidden away next to the green, bubbling pond. 10 years ago he had been acting on instinct, with a scaffolding of guilt, permeated by the need to find purpose in the senseless death of his best friend. Now he wanted to be more purposeful, focused, deliberate in what he would do. Once they pulled back the stones blocking the entrance to the small niche created by a pile of mossy rocks, he could see Tobias's chest, exactly as they had left it. He knelt next to it, reaching with one hand to gently touch the solid lid. Perhaps sensing his need to be alone with his thoughts, Tobias moved away, offering treats to both cart horses. Antonio thought again about that day. He remembered his frantic attempts to locate Samuel and pull him free. There was something significant in the memory, something he had shied away from for 10 years, only truly allowing himself to approach it on the day the twins were born. Now he sensed that, if he could face it freely, objectively, he would discover wisdom. One of the cart horses snorted loudly, the harness jangling as it tossed its head. That was the moment the memory fully coalesced. It was an accident. On that last dive, Samuel must have discovered the chest full of treasure, pulled at it, dislodged it somehow. Once it toppled onto his slender frame, he was pinned under the weight of nearly 300 pounds of gold and treasure, in addition to the chest itself. Antonio's inattention was only one of the elements of the disaster. Even if he had dived with Samuel, he could not have rescued him. His fate was sealed the moment he touched the massive treasure chest. A warm, comforting hand on his shoulder brought Antonio out of the memory. Tobias had returned, and he said,
"It will be safe in the temple."
"But what will the other artisans think?"
Antonio began. Tobias allowed a brief smile to cross his dusky features before admitting,
"I am now head artisan."
Tobias would be able to keep his secret. During the return to the temple, Antonio shared his plans for the artifacts. After several acolytes carried the closed chest into the artisan's quarter of the temple, Antonio handed him the 2 items he'd removed from the chest, a gold bar and a smaller chest that was full of jewels. Tobias accepted the items with a nod. He would do as Antonio asked. The sun was nowhere near the horizon. It was full dark as Antonio saddled up both Rigoberto and Lulu. Rigo, with some work, had become the perfect steed. Laura would be arriving today. He had to force himself to go slowly, carefully, as he prepared for the ride to Pirates Bay. It was 7 months since the twins were born, 16 since he last saw Laura. His nerves were on edge as reality hit him. Today was the day he would know, for sure, if Laura really was the woman who could keep his soul, be his Kaylee. Thoughts of Laura had an inevitable effect on his body, and he had to fight to turn his mind to less tantalizing images. He forced himself to examine the hooves of both horses before swinging into the saddle. Once he felt an easing in his loins, he deliberately turned his thoughts to his twin nephews. They showed no difficulties because of their unusual birth. Already they were crawling and making mischief at a precocious age. They would mature quicker than most. He felt a surge of pride that he would fill the role of uncle, even though he was really their cousin, and that his place in their lives was to be as much advisor and confidant, role model and disciplinarian as their father, the king. He would probably spend more time with them as they matured than his cousin would. Antonio stood on the pier at Pirates End. The crispness of pre-dawn was invigorating. The sun rushed to burst over the horizon, but it would still be another half an hour or longer. Through the rocky strait, he could see the eager sails before any other part of the ship became visible. He was reminded sharply of the same tableau, just 16 months earlier. The Amador was approaching, and he and Reggie were joking about the young women they knew were aboard. They hadn't grasped the implications. For Reggie, his Kaylee was aboard, a woman who, in that moment before dawn, before the ship even docked, was a stranger to him, who would, if all went well, keep his soul safe and secure, walk with him down the pathway of time to the portal of Torizon, and on until time itself ceased to be time. And the reality was different than the expectation. On that bright February morning, instead of one couple brought together by deity, there were 3 couples whose lives were inextricably entwined. That evening, after the young ladies had retired, the 3 men met to discuss the event. Generaldo, one of the king's footmen, had been the first to be struck by the aura. He was, nevertheless, the most eloquent at putting words to his thoughts and describing his reaction to what occurred that morning. The words proved poignant and memorable, and Antonio had written them in his inscrito as soon as he had the opportunity.
They tell us that an Estolian dawn must be seen by all who visit, that it will enrich the life of all who witness its glorious beauty.
Generaldo had to stop what he was saying and physically swallow the emotion clogging his throat, wipe away tears, before looking at Antonio and Reggie.
Imagine all the dawns I have ever seen here upon our land, combined, waltzing off the Amador, concentrated in one glorious woman. And she saw me, and still wanted me.
Reggie's tale of the aura was less dramatic, but equally moving for him. Antonio had felt peaceful, happy that both his cousins had found their Kaylee on that brisk morning. Laura did not show him her aura, and he would have been alarmed if she had. But something about the beautiful young Spanish señorita had nonetheless made itself known to him, to his heart, to his soul. He became convinced that she would show him her aura at the right time. Now she was approaching on the same ship at dawn. The sailors on the fast-approaching vessel moved rapidly, preparing to dock, while dock workers readied themselves to welcome her. Antonio considered the way his cousin, the new king of Estolia, had changed since that other dawn arrival. Reggie and Charlotte were perfectly suited. The near loss of Charlotte in childbirth had brought him to full maturity, helped him step from prince to king in a transition all could see. The life-or-death surgery, followed by the joy of the twin boys, had sharpened Reggie's understanding of what finding one's Kaylee truly meant. It had seemed merely one of life's steps towards maturity before the arrival of the three women the previous year, but Antonio understood it meant much more. This wasn't another step on the pathway of life. This was, perhaps, the summit of individuality and the threshold of a new summit, that of togetherness. He was waxing poetic in his thoughts, and he had a ship to greet. He chuckled softly in the morning air, the sound lost to creaking timbers, wind rippling in the sails, and the shouts of dock workers and sailors coordinating a safe berthing. His father clapped him on the shoulder, perhaps understanding that he'd needed this quiet moment of introspection before meeting Laura again. As the sailors moved in the rigging and on the pier, he reflected again on the last time he saw Laura. He thought grimly of the tantrum she'd thrown when he insisted they had to wait, that he could not marry until he was 30. She was so used to getting her own way that she expected him to relent. He wasn't sure which of them found it more difficult to turn away from that immediate gratification and wait until the time was right in Deity's eyes. Would she still be as self-centered and prone to think of herself as she was when last he saw her? And if she was, would she be right as the Kaylee to the keeper? He frowned, wondering if they would discover that they weren't suited, the one to the other.
Deity gives each Estolian the trials necessary to refine them, help them be the person they were always meant to be.
His father quoted softly in his ear. His warm hand on his shoulder was as reassuring as the words.
This will work out, son.
Would he, Antonio, ever see into the hearts of others with even half the precision of his father? He doubted he would ever know what others were thinking, nor find the perfect words to comfort them. His father seemed to reach into minds and hearts as naturally as breathing. Antonio would try to equal that ability, but he didn't know how. Every insecurity he'd experienced, every doubt fled the minute she stepped onto the dock. Like the brilliant, silver-white edge of a cloud in the summer sky, her aura dazzled him the instant he saw her. He went to her, meeting her halfway. The shouts of sailors and dock workers, the creaking of the ship, all sound disappeared from his awareness. The only thing that remained was the woman who would keep his soul. He grasped both her hands in his and filled his senses with her, feeling the coursing promise of their future together, the sizzling reality of their upcoming seclusion. She had changed since he last saw her, where before she was tempestuous, fiery, focused inward. Now he saw something new upon her face, solid maturity, the triumph of overcoming self, the recognition that one must sometimes subsume one's own needs beneath the needs of others. She was his, truly his, just as he was hers. Together, they would lead Estolia.
The keeper's Kaylee, refined by deity, waiting aged her like the fire.